In Greenidge Women's Correctional Facility, everyone knew the most dangerous gang wasn't the guards. It was the Aryan Queens, a racist prison clique that ruled the showers, the yard, and the lunch line. So when the new black inmate walked in quiet, alone, eyes down, they marked her instantly. It happened in the shower block. Steam everywhere, pipes hissing, no guards in sight. 4 women with blonde hair circled her, smirking, cracking knuckles, blocking every exit like wolves closing in. "Welcome to our house," their leader sneered. "You don't belong here." But the new inmate didn't shake, didn't back up. She just shut off her shower and calmly tied her hair with the elastic band around her wrist. That was their second mistake. Their first mistake was assuming she was weak. Their final mistake was not knowing who she used to be. A Navy SEAL trained close-quarters combat fighter, one of the only women to ever survive the program. A ghost the military pretended didn't exist. When the first gang member grabbed her towel, she finally lifted her head, and the look in her eyes made even the steam feel cold. 45 seconds later, 4 gang members lay on the tiles, bleeding, gasping, begging anyone to save them from the woman they tried to break. Stay with me until the end, because what she reveals after that fight shakes the entire prison and exposes a secret the government tried to erase. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. 3 weeks earlier, Samantha Cross had walked through those prison gates with nothing but the clothes on her back and a conviction that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The media had painted her as a cold-blooded killer, a veteran who snapped under pressure and took justice into her own hands. What they didn't know was the real story behind her court-martial, the classified operations that led to her downfall, and the conspiracy that put her behind bars to silence her forever. The intake process was brutal. Strip searches, delousing procedures, psychological evaluations designed to break down new arrivals before they even reached their cells. Samantha endured it all in complete silence, her military training kicking in automatically. She'd survived worse interrogations in places the government couldn't officially acknowledge existed. The corrections officer who processed her paperwork barely looked up from his clipboard. "Cell Block D, Tier 3, he muttered, sliding a plastic bag containing her prison uniform across the metal desk. "Keep your head down, follow the rules, and you might make it out alive. This ain't some minimum security country club." What he didn't mention was that Cell Block D housed the worst of the worst. Murderers, gang leaders, women who'd carved out territories within the prison walls through violence and intimidation. It was also where the Aryan Queens held court, their influence spreading through every corner of the facility like a cancer. The walk to her cell felt like a parade of predators sizing up fresh meat. Catcalls echoed from behind reinforced doors. Threats whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Samantha kept her eyes forward, her breathing steady, every muscle coiled and ready despite her outwardly calm appearance. Her cellmate was a thin woman with track marks covering her arms and a nervous laugh that seemed to bubble up every few seconds. "They call me Twitch," she said, bouncing slightly on her bunk. "Been here 18 months for armed robbery. What about you?" "Murder," Samantha replied simply, settling onto the bottom bunk without elaborating. Twitch's eyes widened. "Damn, girl, you don't look like the type. But then again, the quiet ones are always the most dangerous, right?" She let out another nervous laugh. "Just so you know, the Queens run this block. Stay out of their way and you might be okay. Cross them and, well, let's just say the guards don't see everything that happens in here." That night, lying on the thin mattress that smelled of disinfectant and desperation, Samantha stared at the ceiling and replayed the events that had brought her to this place. The mission in Syria that had gone sideways, the civilians caught in crossfire, the cover-up that followed when she tried to report what really happened, the mysterious car accident that killed the only witness who could corroborate her story. She'd been framed, discredited, and thrown away by the same government she'd bled for. But they'd made one crucial mistake in their rush to silence her. They'd left her alive. The Aryan queens made their presence known on her second day. Their leader, a muscular woman named Crystal with a spiderweb tattoo covering half her face, cornered Samantha during lunch period. The cafeteria fell silent as Crystal's crew flanked her on both sides, blocking any escape routes. "Fresh meat," Crystal announced loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "I hear you're some kind of soldier girl. Think that makes you tough?" Samantha continued eating her mashed potatoes without looking up. "I think it makes me someone who wants to finish her meal in peace." The response drew snickers from Crystal's followers, but their leader wasn't amused. She leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Let me explain how things work around here. You pay protection, you follow our rules, and you show proper respect, or things get very uncomfortable very quickly." "And if I decline your generous offer?" Samantha asked, finally meeting Crystal's gaze. The spiderweb tattoo seemed to pulse as Crystal's face darkened. "Nobody declines. Not in my house." But Samantha had already gone back to eating, dismissing the threat as if it were nothing more than background noise. The insult was deliberate, calculated to provoke exactly the response she knew was coming. She needed to establish her position in the prison hierarchy quickly, and that meant making an example of the first predator who tested her. Crystal's face flushed red with rage. She reached across the table to grab Samantha's tray, but found herself staring at empty air. Samantha had moved with lightning speed, sliding sideways and standing in one fluid motion that left Crystal grasping at nothing. "My mistake," Samantha said calmly, picking up her tray. "I thought we were having a conversation. Looks like you were planning something else entirely." The entire cafeteria held its breath. Challenging the Aryan queens in public was essentially signing your own death warrant. But Samantha walked away without a backward glance, leaving Crystal standing there with her authority undermined and her reputation damaged. That night, Twitch paced their cell like a caged animal. "Are you completely insane?" she whispered frantically. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Crystal's going to make you pay for that. They all are." Samantha was doing push-ups on the concrete floor, her movements precise and controlled. "Let them try." "You don't understand," Twitch continued, wringing her hands. "They don't just beat people up. They destroy them. Psychologically, physically, completely. I've seen what they do to people who cross them." Samantha finished her set and sat up, her breathing barely elevated despite the intense exercise. "What they don't understand is that I've spent years learning how to destroy people who try to destroy me. This isn't my first war." The war Samantha had mentioned to Twitch wasn't just metaphorical. 3 days after her confrontation with Crystal in the cafeteria, the Aryan queens made their move. They'd spent those days watching her routines, studying her patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to strike when she'd be most vulnerable. They chose the shower block at 8 in the evening, during the shift change when the guards were distracted and the surveillance cameras had their predictable blind spots. Crystal had done her homework, recruiting not just her usual crew, but 2 additional gang members from allied factions. 6 women total, armed with improvised weapons and fueled by the need to restore their damaged reputation. What they didn't know was that Samantha had been expecting this exact scenario from the moment she'd walked away from that cafeteria table. Her military training had taught her to always anticipate the enemy's next move, and prison gangs were depressingly predictable in their tactics. The steam hung thick in the air as Samantha entered the shower area, her movements casual but her senses hyper-alert. She could feel the tension crackling through the humid atmosphere like electricity before a thunderstorm. The usual chatter and laughter from other inmates was conspicuously absent. Even the water pressure seemed different, muffled somehow, as if the very building was holding its breath. Crystal emerged from behind the concrete, pillar like a spider dropping from her web. "Thought you could embarrass me and just walk away?" she snarled, her spider web tattoo seeming to pulse in the flickering fluorescent light. Time to learn some respect. The other 5 women materialized from their hiding spots, blocking every exit route with military precision. They'd clearly planned this ambush carefully, positioning themselves to prevent any escape while maintaining enough distance to avoid getting in each other's way during the attack. But as Samantha calmly shut off her shower and reached for the elastic band around her wrist, something shifted in the atmosphere. The predatory confidence that had radiated from the gang members just moments before flickered like a candle in the wind. Maybe it was the way she moved, economical and precise, wasting no motion or energy. Maybe it was how her breathing remained steady despite being outnumbered 6-1. Or maybe it was something deeper, more primal, the recognition that they were no longer the hunters but had somehow become the prey. Crystal stepped forward, brandishing a sharpened toothbrush handle like a dagger. "Last chance to beg for mercy, soldier girl." Samantha finished tying her hair back and looked up for the first time since entering the shower block. Her eyes held no fear, no anger, no emotion at all. They were the cold, calculating eyes of someone who had killed before and would kill again if necessary. "The only mercy here," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite the hiss of the pipes, "is that I'm not planning to kill any of you today." The first attacker rushed her from the left, swinging a sock filled with batteries in a wide arc aimed at Samantha's head. She ducked under the makeshift weapon and drove her elbow into the woman's solar plexus, dropping her to the wet tiles in a gasping heap before the others could even react. The second gang member came from the right, lunging with a piece of broken mirror clutched in her fist. Samantha caught the woman's wrist, twisted sharply, and used her attacker's momentum to slam her face first into the concrete wall. The mirror shard clattered harmlessly to the floor as the woman crumpled unconscious. Crystal and her remaining followers attacked simultaneously, hoping to overwhelm Samantha through sheer numbers, but they were fighting someone who had been trained to engage multiple hostiles in confined spaces, someone who had survived firefights in buildings much more cramped than this shower block. Samantha moved like water, flowing around their attacks while striking with surgical precision at nerve clusters, pressure points, and joints. A knee to the liver dropped the third attacker. A strike to the carotid artery sent the fourth into unconsciousness before she hit the ground. The fifth gang member, realizing how badly they had miscalculated, turned to flee but slipped on the wet tiles. Samantha caught her by the ankle and applied just enough pressure to a specific nerve cluster to send shooting pain up the woman's entire leg, leaving her writhing and immobilized, but not permanently damaged. That left only Crystal, backing against the shower wall with her makeshift weapon trembling in her grip. The spiderweb tattoo that had once seemed so intimidating now looked like nothing more than desperate bravado on the face of a woman who had finally encountered someone more dangerous than herself. "This isn't possible," Crystal whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. "You're just one person. We had you outnumbered." Samantha stepped over the groaning forms of the fallen gang members, her movements still perfectly controlled, despite having just dismantled 6 attackers in less than a minute. Numbers don't matter when you're fighting someone who was trained to kill entire rooms full of people with their bare hands. She stopped just out of arm's reach, close enough that Crystal could see the complete absence of exertion in her breathing. "You wanted to know what kind of soldier I was? I was the kind they sent when they needed someone to disappear an entire terrorist cell without leaving a trace. The kind they deployed when conventional special forces weren't enough." Crystal's weapon clattered to the floor as her nerve finally broke completely. She slumped against the wall, no longer the predator who had ruled this prison block for years, but simply another victim who had learned too late that some prey fights back with lethal efficiency. But Samantha wasn't finished. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The real question isn't what kind of soldier I was. The real question is why they were so desperate to bury me that they were willing to frame me for murder and throw me in here to die." The shower block fell silent except for the groans of the injured gang members and the steady drip of water from the overhead pipes. Crystal stared up at Samantha with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension that she had stumbled into something far bigger than a simple prison power struggle. The aftermath of the shower block incident spread through Greenidge like wildfire. Within hours, every inmate knew that Crystal and her crew had been dismantled by the quiet new arrival who'd kept to herself for weeks. But what they didn't know was that Samantha's real mission inside these walls was just beginning. As the guards finally arrived to find 6 gang members scattered across the wet tiles, Samantha stood calmly against the wall, her hands visible and non-threatening. She'd positioned herself exactly where the security cameras could capture her defensive posture, ensuring the footage would support her claim of self-defense. "What happened here?" demanded Sergeant Martinez, the head guard whose reputation for brutality was legendary even among the inmates. "They attacked me," Samantha replied simply. "I defended myself." Martinez surveyed the scene, his trained eye taking in the precise nature of the injuries, the way each woman had been incapacitated with surgical efficiency rather than savage brutality. This wasn't the work of an amateur or someone acting in desperate panic. This was professional. 6 against 1, and you're the only one standing?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Samantha met his gaze steadily. "I learned to fight in places where losing meant dying. They learned to fight in places where losing meant getting a black eye." The medical team arrived to treat the injured gang members, and Samantha was escorted to solitary confinement pending investigation. But as she walked through the corridors, she noticed something crucial. The other inmates weren't looking at her with fear or hatred like she'd expected. Instead, there was something else in their eyes: hope. For years, the Aryan Queens had terrorized every minority in this prison: African-American women, Latinas, anyone who didn't fit their twisted vision of racial purity. They'd created a system of oppression within the walls that the guards either ignored or actively enabled. But in 45 seconds, one woman had shattered that system completely. Solitary confinement was exactly what Samantha needed. The isolation gave her time to process what she'd learned during her weeks of observation, and more importantly, it gave her access to something she'd been waiting for. Late that night, as the prison settled into its uneasy quiet, she heard the soft scraping sound she'd been expecting. A small piece of paper slid under her cell door, followed by a whispered voice. "They told me to give you this. Said you'd understand what it means." Samantha unfolded the note in the darkness, her fingers tracing the words written in careful block letters. "Operation Blackout. Level 7 clearance required. Contact established. Awaiting instructions." She closed her eyes and allowed herself a small smile. After months of careful planning, her real mission was finally beginning. The fight in the shower block hadn't been about establishing dominance or surviving prison politics. It had been a signal, a way of announcing her presence to the people who'd been waiting for her arrival. The next morning, Warden Patricia Holbrook sat across from Samantha in the administrative conference room, a thick file spread across the metal table between them. Holbrook was a career corrections officer who'd climbed the ranks through a combination of political savvy and genuine competence. But she'd never encountered a situation quite like this. "Your military records are mostly classified," Holbrook said, flipping through pages that were heavily redacted with black ink. "What I can see suggests you were involved in operations that officially never happened." "That's correct," Samantha replied. "The incident report from last night indicates you single-handedly defeated 6 armed gang members without sustaining any injuries yourself. Care to explain how that's possible?" Samantha leaned back in her chair, considering her words carefully. "Warden, what do you know about the Navy's Special Warfare Development Group?" Holbrook's eyebrows rose slightly. She knew enough to recognize the reference to one of the military's most secretive units. "I know it doesn't officially exist." "Correct again. What you're looking at in that file is someone who spent 8 years in programs that were so classified. Even the Pentagon pretends they never happened. I was trained to infiltrate enemy territory, establish contact with resistance networks, and eliminate threats to national security. And you're telling me this why? Samantha's expression grew deadly serious. Because this prison isn't just a correctional facility, Warden. It's being used as a recruitment and training ground for domestic terrorist organizations. The Aryan Queens aren't just a prison gang. They're part of a much larger network that extends far beyond these walls. The room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Holbrook set down the file and studied Samantha's face, looking for any sign of deception or mental instability. What she saw instead was the calm, focused demeanor of someone stating facts rather than spinning conspiracy theories. "That's a serious accusation," Holbrook said finally. "It's about to get more serious. The fight last night wasn't random violence. It was a test, designed to verify my capabilities and establish my credibility with certain inmates who've been gathering intelligence on this operation for months." Samantha reached into her pocket and withdrew a small device that looked like a hearing aid battery. This contains encrypted communications between gang leaders and outside contacts. Names, dates, financial transactions, recruitment strategies, everything needed to prove that this prison is being used as a hub for coordinating attacks against minority communities across 3 states. Holbrook stared at the device as if it might explode. "How did you get this?" "The same way I got myself convicted and sentenced to this facility. Sometimes the best way to catch monsters is to let them think they've trapped you in their lair." The revelation hung between them like a live wire. Holbrook had built her career on maintaining order within the prison system. But what Samantha was describing went far beyond anything she'd imagined. If even half of these allegations were true, her facility had been compromised at the highest levels. "Assuming I believe you," Holbrook said slowly, "what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we finish what I started in that shower block. The Aryan Queens are just the visible tip of this operation. The real power structure runs much deeper, involving guards, administrators, and outside financial backers who see this place as their personal terrorist training camp." Samantha leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But they made one crucial mistake when they arranged for me to be sent here. They assumed I was just another inconvenient witness they could bury behind bars. They didn't realize I was bait." The pieces were falling into place for Holbrook, creating a picture that was both terrifying and oddly logical. The unusual patterns she'd noticed in gang recruitment, the sophisticated communication networks that seemed to operate independently of normal prison hierarchies, the way certain incidents always seemed to happen when specific guards were on duty. "The federal agents who've been asking questions about gang activity," she said, her voice tight with understanding. "They're not here for a routine investigation. They're here because someone in Washington finally connected the dots between attacks in different states and traced the coordination back to this facility. But catching the foot soldiers won't stop the operation. We need the leadership structure, the financial network, the outside contacts who make all of this possible." Samantha stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the exercise yard where inmates moved in carefully segregated groups. "The woman I fought last night, Crystal, she's going to be desperate to restore her reputation. That desperation will force her to reach out to her handlers for support and resources. When she does, we'll be listening." "And if you're wrong about all of this?" Holbrook asked. Samantha turned back from the window, and for the first time since entering the prison, she allowed her true nature to show completely. The mask of the quiet, defeated inmate fell away, revealing the predatory focus of someone who had spent years hunting the most dangerous people on Earth. "Then I'm just a convicted murderer who got lucky in a prison fight. But if I'm right, we're about to expose a domestic terrorism network that makes the Aryan Queens look like amateur hour." The silence that followed was broken by a soft knock on the conference room door. A guard entered with a message slip that he handed to the warden. Holbrook read it quickly, her face paling slightly. "What is it?" Samantha asked. "Crystal wants to make a deal. She's claiming she has information about outside contacts and wants to negotiate protection in exchange for cooperation." Samantha smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Right on schedule. She's more predictable than I thought. The trap was set, the players were in position, and the real operation was about to begin. But as Samantha prepared for the next phase of her mission, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was watching, waiting, and planning their own moves in this deadly game of chess. The question wasn't whether she could expose the terrorist network operating within the prison walls. The question was whether she could do it before they realized who she really was and why she'd been sent to destroy them. The meeting with Crystal took place in the prison's medical wing, where she lay recovering from a dislocated shoulder and 3 cracked ribs. Her spiderweb tattoo looked faded against her pale, bruised skin, and the confidence that had once made her the most feared woman in Greenidge had evaporated completely. Samantha entered the room flanked by 2 guards, her expression neutral as she took the chair across from Crystal's hospital bed. Warden Holbrook stood near the door, clipboard in hand, officially recording what would appear to be a routine post-incident interview. "You wanted to talk," Samantha said simply. Crystal's voice was barely above a whisper, her throat still raw from the precise strike that had temporarily paralyzed her vocal cords during their fight. "I know who you are now. Took me a while to place the face, but I remember the news reports from 3 years ago, the court-martial, the classified mission that went wrong." Samantha's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Do you now?" "Lieutenant Commander Samantha Cross, Navy SEAL Team 6, dishonorably discharged for allegedly murdering civilians in Syria." Crystal struggled to sit up straighter, wincing with each movement. "Except that's not what really happened, is it?" The room grew quiet except for the steady beep of monitoring equipment. Holbrook's pen had stopped moving across her clipboard, and even the guards seemed to lean in slightly, sensing they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple prisoner interview. "You're going to tell me what you think you know," Samantha said, her tone carrying the subtle threat of someone who could easily finish what she'd started in the shower block. Crystal's laugh turned into a painful cough. "I know because my people on the outside told me. The ones who've been watching you since the day you walked through those gates. You're not here because you got convicted of murder. You're here because someone wanted you here." She reached under her pillow with trembling fingers and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This came through our communication network 2 days ago. Read it." Samantha unfolded the note, her trained eye immediately recognizing the code structure and encryption patterns. The message was brief but clear. "Package delivered. Asset in position. Initiate Protocol 7 when ready. Your handlers know exactly who you are," Crystal continued, her voice growing stronger as she sensed she'd gained some leverage. "They know about your real mission, your Navy background, everything. They've been planning for your arrival for months." Warden Holbrook stepped closer, her face pale with the realization that her facility had been compromised at levels she'd never imagined. "What handlers? Who are you talking about?" Crystal's eyes never left Samantha's face. "The people who run the real operation here. The ones who use gangs like mine as foot soldiers while they coordinate something much bigger from the outside. They know you're not really a murderer, Cross. They know you're here to destroy them." The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Samantha had walked into what she thought was a carefully planned undercover operation, only to discover that her targets had been expecting her all along. Every move she'd made, every contact she'd established, every piece of intelligence she'd gathered had potentially been orchestrated by the very people she was trying to expose. But instead of showing concern or surprise, Samantha leaned back in her chair and smiled. It was the first genuine expression of amusement she'd displayed since entering the prison, and it sent a chill through everyone in the room. "You know what the beautiful thing about being a SEAL is?" she asked conversationally. "We're trained to adapt to changing mission parameters in real time. When the original plan fails, you improvise. When the enemy knows you're coming, you change the rules of engagement." Crystal's momentary confidence began to crumble as she realized she might not have gained the upper hand after all. "What are you talking about?" I'm talking about the fact that you and your handlers made the same mistake everyone else makes when they try to predict how special operations work. You assumed this was my only plan. Samantha stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the exercise yard where inmates moved through their daily routines, unaware that their entire world was about to change. The mission briefing I received before my conviction was intentionally incomplete. My commanding officers knew there was a possibility that our intelligence had been compromised, so they built multiple contingencies into the operation. She turned back to Crystal, and the predatory focus had returned to her eyes. You think your people have been watching me? I've been watching them watch me. Every communication they've intercepted, every move they think I've made according to their plan, has actually been feeding them exactly the information I wanted them to have. Warden Holbrook's mind was racing as she tried to process the implications. You're saying this entire situation has been orchestrated? Not orchestrated. Guided. The fight in the shower block was always going to happen because Crystal's crew was always going to test the new arrival. But the timing, the location, the specific way it played out, those details were influenced by intelligence I've been carefully leaking through channels I knew were compromised. Crystal's face went white as the full scope of what Samantha was describing began to sink in. You've been playing us from the beginning. I've been playing a game that started long before I walked through these gates. The real question is whether you're smart enough to realize that your only chance of survival is to help me finish it. The medical equipment continued its steady beeping as the room fell into tense silence. Crystal stared at Samantha with a mixture of fear and grudging respect, finally understanding that she was dealing with someone whose training and experience operated on a completely different level than anything she'd encountered in her years of prison politics. What do you want from me? Crystal asked finally. I want you to do exactly what you were planning to do anyway. Contact your handlers. Tell them about our fight, about how I dismantled your crew, about how dangerous I am. But when they give you new orders, when they tell you how they want you to handle me, I want you to remember something. Samantha moved closer to the bed, close enough that Crystal could see the absolute certainty in her eyes. Everything you think you know about this situation is wrong. Everyone you think is in control is actually dancing to music I started playing months ago. And the people who sent you that note warning about my arrival, they have no idea what's really coming for them. 3 months later, federal agents raided 17 facilities across 3 states, dismantling the largest domestic terrorism network ever discovered, operating within the prison system. Samantha Cross walked free, her conviction overturned, her mission complete. The Aryan Queens? They learned that some people don't break when you try to destroy them. They become the instrument of your destruction instead. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimated.